All right, what's popping, everybody? Welcome back to the FNB App Academy 2025. I am your host. My name is Karabo Mohole. It's always a privilege and an honor to be part of this beautiful ecosystem that is all about kickstarting those winning apps of yours. All right, so our previous session focused on how to use AI in development. And today's session, we'll be looking into business funding, right? But before we get into that, let us meet the guys behind the best agricultural solutions at last year's App of the Year Awards, Farm Ranger.
Well, we have an excellent product in the field where we have a application that we have written that is a livestock monitor that we can hang around the sheep's neck and then monitor the movement and have alarms being sent to the farmer in case of any problems. Predation is a problem as well as theft. So whenever a sheep has some unnatural movement like running fast, then the livestock collar will then alert the farmer, and then the farmer can then investigate. Well, we were lucky that we had a product that was live in the apps in the farmer's hands for 6 years. So we had lots of experience in what is necessary for a farmer to have. Our app that served us very well for 6 years, it obviously has reached an end of life, and we decided to embark on a new journey to create this new app. And yeah, this is where we stand tonight, and we have developed and delivered an application in the farmer's hands that have good value to their business. It's countrywide, yeah. We've got about 3,000 farmers that use our app. We currently have about 9,000 collars inside South Africa, and we've got a couple of collars outside, international. We really want to go and investigate that market as well. And so we probably about 3 million livestock that we currently have under our protection. So it's quite a big product.
All right, awesome stuff. That's what I love to hear, taking South African solutions to the world. All right, so this is an important juncture right now where we get to see what you guys have been up to on social media. But before we get into that, please don't forget to hashtag FNB App Academy. It's always important to let the world know about this beautiful ecosystem, which is the App Academy. All right, so speaking about social media, let us see what you guys have been up to on your social spaces this week. All right, awesome stuff right there. It's really amazing to see those videos all on social media. Please don't forget to hashtag FNB App Academy to keep those videos coming. All right, so with that being said, this is the important time to jump into this week's lesson, which is all about business funding. Some really important conversation that we're about to jump into. But before we get into that, let us head over into a very special insert that is all about financial literacy. Now, this is going to be a very important concept for us to grasp within the money-making journey. And right here in studio, I'm joined by a very special guest. I've got Given Siagatie from FNB, the consumer educator. Mom Given, how are you?
Thank you so much. Good morning. How are you doing?
I'm good. First of all, thank you so much for joining us in our FNB studios. It's really nice to have you right here with us. First and foremost, I think we're about to jump into a very important topic, which is business funding. But obviously, right now, we're going to be talking about financial literacy, just so the app developers can just get a gist of the importance of money, right? But let's talk, what is financial literacy?
Really, financial literacy is understanding the various skills and concept of personal finances, having to make a savvy financial decisions through mindset change and having to change some of the habits, right, that we're doing out there.
Yeah, beautiful. And obviously, a lot of, developers may wonder, I'm here to learn about apps. Why now do we need to understand the importance of financial literacy? What is the importance of financial literacy, Mark?
Karabo, there's quite a lot of reasons that we can unpack why we need financial literacy. For starters, there's no subject in finances in schools, right? That's why we out there making a difference about personal finances. And there's no curriculum at all teaching our consumers about personal finances. Secondly, the world is full of competition.
Yeah.
We want what others have. Right now, you're having this beautiful sweater that we spoke about this morning.
Thank you so much. Yeah, I really do. Yeah.
Yeah. I'm not going to say it looks lovely on you.
Yeah.
I'm going to ask you, where did you buy it?
Yeah.
Then I'm going to buy something that's better than yours.
Yeah. Oh my gosh.
Yeah. We need financial literacy because out there, our parents have taught us, age and one again, you live once. Use that money, you live once, my child.
Yeah.
But they forgot to teach us one thing, that you need to save some money as well.
Yeah.
We need financial literacy because that's the right thing to do. We've got entrepreneurs out there where the moment they get money and all that, what do they do? They entertain themselves, and what do? They buy cars, they rent properties and all that without thinking of having to grow their businesses.
Wow.
That's why we need financial literacy.
Wow. Very, very important. And right now, you begin to understand the importance of, learning about money, because oftentimes, from the background that we come from, talking about money, it's really, really difficult.
Yeah.
A lot of parents don't really teach because they also don't know. But now having such platforms like this where you can be given so much knowledge and fruit on the importance on saving, but also understanding money, right? Which is why we're having such amazing conversations. But now let's talk about, what offerings does your FNB Institute offer?
We do have a huge program, right? That literally takes about 6 hours to unpack it. Beautiful stuff, right? So we have what you call understanding my money. That's the first theme, where we talk about needs and wants. I take you back to school. Right?
All right.
What are needs and wants, by the way?
Good question. You're asking me.
Yeah.
Needs are, what's important, right?
Correct.
Things that are going to sustain you for life. And wants are your desires.
Have you ever thought why we're spending a lot of money on wants?
I think right now the most important thing is, how fast this life is, especially even how things are on social media. We're talking a lot about developers and entrepreneurs, and they get to see the lives that others are living, and they want to match that.
Absolutely. Absolutely. So we'll be talking about those, and again, we talk about budgeting. How do we budget the practical way? We use the word loosely. Yeah, budget, I'm budgeting.
Yeah.
What are we budgeting for? Right? And the next theme, that's growing my money through savings and investments. When you've done your budget and you're left with a deficit or a surplus, what do you then do, right? With what you left with or what you don't have, right?
Yeah.
Most of the people, when they have a surplus, we go and chill. We entertain ourselves. Wrong. The right way is to definitely look at your budget, look at the accounts that you owing, the interest that they're charging you out there, and you're paying extra. All right? And then we go on to the third theme, managing debt. We all have debts, and some of us, we over-indebted. I might have to ask you or pose a question out there. Where are you financially? Are you in the red? Are you in a financial corner? Are you in the green where when somebody asks you, Who do you owe and all that? You can tell them, this is how much I owe, the interest that they're charging me, and the first account I'm going to finish in June, the second account in December, the third one in 10 years' time. People talk like that are in the green. They account for each and every cent that comes in, and they account for each and every cent that goes out. And then on the managing debt, we talk about the steps of how to get out of debt, right? By the time we're done with that, right, having to explain the different types of lenders, how to look at your credit score, who are the credit bureaus, you know?
Yeah.
And when you are over indebted, what do you then do? Do you run away from the private numbers? Do you run away from the 087 numbers? But one thing that I can guarantee is that after that theme, you will be so bold enough to contact your creditors. Hi, this is Given speaking, I'm your client, or this is Karabo speaking, I'm your client. I need to come and make the arrangements. All right? The fourth theme, that's protecting the things that matters. We're talking about all things insurances.
Yeah, yeah.
Short-term insurances and long-term insurances. Most of the people out there, they've got lots of insurances, so they either over-insured or they under-insured. Now I'm going to talk about the young ones out there.
Yeah.
They don't understand. They given documents and all that, they don't read the terms and conditions and all that. They just sign. What are the repercussions? Do they know what is included and what is excluded in that contract? Then we talk about retirements. We're all going to retire at some point.
Definitely.
When would you like to retire, if I may pose a question to you?
As early as possible.
And early is? You don't have to give your age away.
No, I'm very young. I probably love to retire, let's say, before 60.
Before 60.
Yeah.
So people retire at 50, 55, 60 the most, and they live long enough till 90. Now, tell me, what's going to happen if you haven't planned for your retirement for 30 years?
Yeah.
You see where the generational thing come from?
Yeah.
Because
Yeah.
now we tend to burden our kids with whatever we have to pay and all that, right? So don't think that you're young. You have to start thinking now about your retirement.
Definitely.
There's a different products out there. We're talking about the provident funds and everything that are out there. But there's also the RAs, the retirement annuities that people can be able to utilize, right? There's the tax-free savings that people can be able to utilize. And we're not thinking about or talking about thousands of rands, right? We're talking about having to start with just the 100 rands, because there are products out there that you can be able to utilize to start investing, saving and investing for yourself. We're talking about your future. The last theme that we talk about is leaving a legacy. Certainly, we're all going to die at some point. The assets that you're accumulating when you're young, working hard for those, right? Who's going to own those? The biggest question is, having to be an entrepreneur or having your own business, who's going to take over? What legacy are you going to leave behind for your kids? It's not a conversation that you're going to talk about when you're 50 or 60. You start thinking about those when you're accumulating your assets. And when is the time? The time is right.
Right now.
And this is where we want to end our conversation about the themes here.
Wow, I'm just really in awe because, just having such discussions right here at the FNB App Academy, it's really imperative for us to understand that we are literally being set up for our future. And right now, please do head over at social media and don't forget to hashtag FNB App Academy. And let's thank Given Sagatie for this impactful knowledge that she has spewed right here in studio. But before we're done, Given, I want you to please look into that camera, right? And is there anything that you want to leave our students with as they get started on the right track? What would that be specifically?
I'm going to take you back to our conversation earlier. Are you in the red? Are you in the green? or are you in the amber? I'm not going to leave you empty-handed. Here's some food for thought. Whatever you will be thinking about, start thinking about your budget, and that's what I'm going to definitely share with you in the next conversation on understanding my money. But go back home, work on that, your status, think about very hard where you are financially right now, and I will be able to take you through on that journey.
All right, awesome stuff right there from Given, actually giving us a little bit of a nugget on the importance of this particular conversation that we had on financial literacy. Right, so this was just a brief overview on financial literacy, but we have some great news for you guys. We have an additional episode, which is going to be episode 19th, where Given will be back with us speaking on financial literacy. All right, with that being said, now you guys have been armed and plugged. Let us head over to meet Craig McLeod.
Welcome to the FNB App Academy. I am your host today. My name is Craig McLeod. I am a venture capitalist and a founder with 3 exits and a current startup valued north of $50 million. Today, we're going to talk about raising investment for your startup. So the first thing you have to understand is splitting the pie. You have a business, you are going to raise an amount of money for a percentage of that business. And this will happen in different stages across the lifestyle of your startup. So for example, the first stage is what we call the idea stage or pre-seed. This stage really is, I have an idea, I now want to try bring that idea to life. Now normally you would raise from friends or family, what we call the friends, family and fools, in order to get some initial capital to start building out your idea. The better way of doing this is to keep your day job, please keep your day job, and to build as much of the app as you possibly can to get it ready for market. The next stage in your life cycle is seed. You've almost fully built your app, or you've fully built your app, you've got 1 or 2 customers. You would raise venture capital to then help you fund growing this business, getting a good number of customers or good traction, show that there is potential of this business, and then you continue to raise more money. The final stage then becomes Series A. You're now out of the seed rounds, and this is where real venture capital kicks in, and now you have a good business. In a Series A business, you've got a fully built product. That fully built product has a good number of customers, maybe 1% market share or something less than that. And you're now going to use this money to show that you can grow from maybe 1% market share to 10% market share. Series B, you've grown to 10% market share or 15% market share. You want to show you can go take 50% market share in whichever industry you might be working in. Now, the series numbering and naming is pretty straightforward. Series A, B, C, D, and so you go down the alphabet. Now, each time you take a new series round of funding, obviously your equity will get smaller. The thing to bear in mind is that each time you take money, you are putting that money to good use and growing the business. And people often say, oh, but I might only end up with 10% of my business. The analogy is very simple. Would you rather have 10% of a grape or 10% of the watermelon? If you're doing your job and you're growing your business stage by stage, you will be worth a lot of money. If you think about a company like Google, who makes $16 to $20 billion a quarter, if you had 9% of that, like its current founders do, you would be pretty happy. Now, all of this comes down to something called valuation. Now, how do you value this particular startup? You're going to give away a percentage of your business for an amount of money. But how do you put a price on that, especially if you've got no customers and revenue? Well, in the early stages, you'll probably give away anywhere between 10 and 20%. And what you need to make sure is that you raise enough money to then have 24 months runway or 18 months runway and to be able to do whatever it is you promise. So if I'm going to raise $200,000 for 20% of my business, that would give me a valuation of $1 million. Now, within that $200,000, I commit to saying I will have a fully built product and maybe a few months in market. So you have to make sure that the amount you're asking for matches what you say you are going to be able to do. However, you have to be realistic. You have an idea, it's worth $1 billion. No, it's absolutely not. Your idea is worth 0% of your success. If you do world-class technical execution, let's say you're taking on Tesla or Shopify or OpenAI, if you have to be able to execute at least as good as them with your shoestring budget, you're a startup, but doesn't mean you can lower standards, that's worth 10% of your success. And how many customers you have paying you money, that is 90% of your success. So if you think you've got the next $1 billion idea, well, no, it's only going to be worth $1 billion in about 10 to 15 years' time, because that's how long it takes. So initially, in the idea stage, the seed stage, you are typically raising enough money for 24 months to 36 months runway and to deliver on your promise. Now, I've raised my $200,000 for my imaginary business. I now want to raise some more money. Well, the next people looking to give you money are going to ask the question, what did you do with the last 200,000? Have you met all those milestones you said you would? Show me progress. And it's always a game of showing as much progress as it can. You should also be wary of incubators and accelerators. They're an absolute waste of time unless you're getting into something like Y Combinator. If you are going to give away a percentage of equity for your business, it is either for money or guaranteed customers. If you don't do that, you're just wasting your time. So please, please don't do that. Now, what you have to understand in going through all these phases is if you've got a realistic valuation and you've now raised some money, when you get to your Series A, Series B, Series C, you're going to start having customers and revenue. And then the way you work out valuation changes. You have 1,000 customers paying you $100 a month. You make $100,000 a month as what we call MRR, monthly recurring revenue. Well, if you want to know what that business is worth, what someone will typically do to you is they'll take your 5 years projected revenue based on your current revenue, and that will give a non-present value, an NPV. The model is called a discounted cash flow. They take your cash flow, they discount it against inflation, they get a number. That's what your company is worth. So now if you've got to Series A, you're in market but nobody's using you, your valuation is going to be very, very small. If lots of people are using you, not just your grandma and your mom because they believe in you, your valuation is going to be very, very big. So it really is based on your performance. Once you take money, you don't have any excuses. So how do you raise money? There's a simple checklist. You need a good product, which means something people want, they're willing to pay for, it solves a problem. A good deck, and it's a very funny thing, which we will talk about shortly, how 10 slides in PowerPoint can raise you $10 million. You need to understand TAM, SAM, and SOM. You need a forecast that is sane. In other words, you need to be able to predict how much money you're going to spend along with how much money you're going to make, and it needs to be realistic. You're not going to China to get 1% of the chopstick market. VCs will laugh you out the room. And then finally, your ask cannot be insane. Again, if you think you've got $1 billion idea, remember it's not worth that until you've got $100 million a year in revenue. Great, so let's talk about each of these. So a good product is easy enough. A good deck, I will discuss that for you. TAM, SAM, and SOM. So you have the total addressable market. Let's say we are the next great startup in inflatable kittens. The inflatable kitten market right now in South Africa might be $1 billion. But of that inflatable, there's what you can actually service. Now, you can probably service the major cities, Cape Town, Durban, Johannesburg. So then that number shrinks down to about 40% of the market. And then there's what you can actually service and get, which is your SOM. And you can say, okay, of that 40%, we can get 10%. So in other words, if it's $1 billion market, we can get 4% of that market over the next 4 years. And this, then you suddenly realize your billion idea is not maybe $1 billion idea, but it still might be a $40 million or a $4 million a year business, depending on that market sizing. And you have to know this. If you don't know your numbers, you can't expect someone else to give money to someone who doesn't know how to do the job, right? Your forecast should be done by someone who is an accountant, and it should be reasonable. Again, you're not going to go get 1% of the chopstick market in China in a year and just retire. you are absolutely probably going to get 0.5% of a market over a few years. So rather under-promise and over-deliver. And this will also start getting you reasonable that it's not a billion idea, but you can work it to be $1 billion idea over 10 years. Get to the first $1 million, then the next 10, 100, and so on. And of course, ask for a reasonable amount of money. So what is a deck and how do we build one? So it's a very funny thing in startups. I've done it a number of times. I've raised hundreds of millions across various businesses and venture capital firms. Essentially, it's a PowerPoint. It has 10 slides, and depending on the day, someone can give you anywhere from $300,000 to $15 million if that's presented well. Now, on the one hand, you're thinking this is crazy. On the other hand, it's not that easy. So I'm going to break down what you need to do, how you need to go about it, and how you need to think about it. So a good deck is a way to explain in a structured way, no longer than 3 minutes, what your product is about and why people will back you. Now, that doesn't sound like a lot of time, but you've got to remember, you've probably only got 20 minutes of a venture capitalist's time. You need to explain it in 3 minutes and leave them 17 minutes to ask you questions and help sell them on why they should give you money. Your job is to get people excited about what you're doing, but also show that you have enough understanding of the business you are building, not the technology. You're building a business. Building cool tech is a side sort of, I guess, effect. And that they're comfortable enough to give you money, that you understand what you're doing, and that you can actually execute on the thing you say you can execute on. A good deck will always follow what's called the 30-20-10 rule by Guy Kawasaki. It is a 30-point font. In other words, you don't want to be writing novels all over your deck, because the moment you write a novel, someone is going to be reading the deck ahead of you and not connecting with you and the message you're trying to tell. So it teaches you how to be succinct, how to summarize, and really how to communicate well. Einstein has the best possible saying on this: if you cannot explain it to your grandmother, you don't understand how it works. And you should be able to do the same when talking to a venture capitalist or anyone wanting to understand your business. 20 minutes is the 20 part of 30-20-10. In most cases, you will get 20 to 30 minutes to meet a VC. If you spend the entire 20 minutes going, "Daddy, Daddy, look at my toy, I want to show you my thing," and leave them no time to ask questions, you will not raise capital. And then finally, 10 slides. If you cannot explain it in 10 slides, you will never be able to explain it, and you will never be able to raise money. Now, you won't be getting millions of dollars for your idea day one. You will probably raise $300,000, maybe $1 million, but you won't be raising huge, massive money day one unless you're building something that takes $500 million to start. You're building the next actual AI, not an AI wrapper. You're building nuclear power. You are building, the cure for cancer. But if you're just building a tech startup, which maybe has some cutesy AI stuff that wraps some other AI, you're probably talking hundreds of $1,000s day one, not billions. So again, be realistic with your ask, and through your deck, show that you have a plan to back this up. Now, before I go into the deck structure, I want to talk about building a network. When you need to raise money, you have to understand that there are only on any given day between 1 and 4 venture capital firms in South Africa who have money to give. It is very small money due to the weakness of our currency, and the terms in which they give it to you are usually fairly bad. This doesn't speak to everyone, but generally the term sheets are terrible and you shouldn't do them. So that means you're going to have to learn how to network. That means that the money you raise will most likely come from America, the GCC, or Asia. It'll certainly come from outside of the continent. So if you think that you sitting at home at your nice little house in Camps Bay or Norwood or wherever you might be, people are going to rock up on your shores and just offer you money, absolutely not. You also have to realize that from day 1 to year 11, year 15 of running your startup, you will speak to over 1,000 venture capitalists. Bill Gates in his time spoke to 5,000, dealt with only 11. It is a game of numbers. So you need to build that network outside of South Africa. Then, of course, and you've got to be willing to travel. Then, of course, we have what we call the Venn diagram of startup hell. You can feel free to steal that. I want to go to a venture capitalist. I now want to get their money. But they have a number of requirements, concerns, thoughts about how they want to spend the money. They have a thesis of where they're spending money and why that will get returned for their investors. So, as an example, the first circle on our Venn diagram is geography. Do they find South Africa interesting, or Australia, or Southwest Tanzania, wherever you might be dealing? Now, if you're a good startup, you're not dealing with a single tiny market. You're a global business, so that's okay. You're selling software. The next Venn diagram is, do they want to invest in inflatable kittens? Do they invest in mining? Do they invest in e-commerce? You have to see if there's an intersection between where they invest and what is the theme of your business. Then you have to have another little circle Venn diagram where it has to be, do they invest in your particular check size or your stage, whether it's seed, Series A, Series B, whatever the case may be. Then you get another Venn diagram of, do they have any money? In my life, I've pitched many VCs only to find out they were using me to show other investors they had access to good deals, but they didn't have any money. In fact, one VC asked me to pitch 12 times over 3 years, and in year 4, they only got their first money. So you have to filter out who has money. But if you're following already, we're at 5 different reasons where if these don't all perfectly line up, you won't necessarily get funding. The other one that is very important is, where is your business housed? Now, legally, from a jurisdiction point of view, why that matters is investors want to invest in countries where the law, the legal frameworks allow them either to high-five you or strangle you, depending on your performance. Now, typically, places like South Africa have very draconian labor laws, they have very bad tax laws. An investor doesn't want to put their money, especially if they're sitting in the US or Europe or the GCC, down in deepest, darkest Africa, because they don't trust that they might get a fair legal dispute resolution, whatever it might be, which is why you will see that almost all startups are housed either in Delaware in the US, the UK as a sort of fourth choice, places like the UAE or GCC, Singapore, or the Maltas, the Liechtensteins, etc. What an investor wants is their lawyers want to be able to deal with things in English, in a well-known and well-understood and very mature legal framework. They want the least amount of tax when you finally make the millions, if you do. And they want it to be easy for them, again, to high-five you or strangle you, depending how you as a founder perform. But what this means is that now there are 6, and the real Venn diagram is probably about 14 reasons, where you will speak to 50 different VCs and you won't make it to that perfect center of that Venn diagram. And if you don't make it to that perfect center, well, they're not going to invest. So let's talk about a deck. Now, when you talk about a deck, there are only 10 slides you need. The first slide is your opening page, which is your logo, a title, what does your company do, and some contact details. Your next slide becomes your problem and opportunity. So right now, the inflatable kitten market is underserviced. It is an $8 billion market, and this is where the pain is. Now, pain, challenge, opportunity are all measured in a financial way. The bigger the pain, the more amount of money there is to be made. And you want to show that you have done the research and you understand what the pain is and how much that pain is worth. Then, your value proposition, how you, as slide 3, are going to alleviate that pain and how that will translate to a good investment and money being made. Your slide 4 is the underlying magic or secret sauce. Why is your approach to inflatable kittens better than anyone else's approach to inflatable kittens, and how you're going to be a little better than the other guy who's also trying to get the market? And there will always be lots of other guys who are trying to get the market. Then, good old slide, next slide coming up is the business model. Now, slide 5 is probably one of the most important slides. It shows that you know how you're going to make money, whether this is with subscription, transaction fees, data, however it is you make money, you must show that you have a clear understanding and that it makes sense and that people would pay that. Because at the end of the day, if I'm going to give you $1 million or whatever I might as a venture capitalist, I want to make sure I'm going to make my money back, right? So the business model is super important. Slide 6 is the go-to-market. Now, a go-to-market says, we have a plan. We are going to, do this much in social media, this much in activations. We're going to use this partnership channel. And you would have multiple layers, and you should have a good understanding of what that's going to cost, how long it's going to take to realize, and how much money you should probably make to that. Now, there is a lovely note which you'll see on the slides when you get them, but going viral is not something that's going to easily happen, and that is not a go-to-market plan. The VC in question is one of the world's most famous, uses more eloquent terming, or should I say flowery language on the slide, just on how much he thinks about that. Then there's the competitive analysis. If you walk up to a VC and say, I would like to do the next Uber or the next Shopify or the next Spotify, and he asks, who are your competitors? And we go, oh, we don't have any competitors. You will not get investment. It shows you haven't done market research, you don't understand the market, and you don't understand what you're up against. So you want to know what you're up against. You want to know what your challenges are, and you want to know how you're going to overcome those challenges. And again, it just shows you have a plan, you've thought about it, and you know how to execute. Then there's the management team. Yes, venture capitals back a founder. If they like the founder, they'll put in the money. But a founder only has 40 to 90 hours a week where they're working, depending on how hard you work. And believe me, you're going to be closer to 90 and 100 hours a week than you are to 40. But they want a team, because you are limited. You can only do so much. You only have so many skills in so many areas. You're not an expert in everything. So they want to see you have a team behind you. You have the CFO who's going to keep you honest and not let you overspend. You have a good CTO. You've got a good marketing head, etc. And that you have experience in the industry you proclaim to want to go take. It's a lot like if you were ever going to court and you would be charged with murder, you'd probably want a criminal lawyer, not a plumber. They want to see that your team are not plumbers, right? There has to be some depth of domain experience and understanding. Then, very important slide, financial projections and key metrics. Your finances slide is essentially a budget. It shows that you know how much things cost you, you know how much you're spending on marketing, you know how much money you're making back from marketing, you know what the next 24 months look like. If I'm going to give you $1 million as a venture capitalist, I need to make sure that you're not going to waste my money, and you're going to have to do your homework and have a proper plan and try to stick to it. So it has to be realistic. It's not just made up numbers. Again, we're going to take 1% of the chopstick market in China and be billionaires in 3 months. Life does not work like that. The final stage is accomplishes to dates, timeline and use of funds. Now, there is a list of do's and don'ts. I will start with the don'ts. Do not put I was in accelerator X, accelerator Y. The only accelerator in the world that makes a difference to anybody is Y Combinator. Anything else, waste of time. Do not put in that fluffy press release where so-and-so featured you on TechCrunch or whatever it might be. Again, VCs do not care. The only thing they care about is real accomplishments. We raised X amount of dollars. With that X amount of dollars, we were able to get 10,000 customers. The VC will then be able to do the math and said, okay, great, you raised $1 million, you got 10,000 customers. Okay, it costs you $100 a customer to get those customers, but you make $600 per customer. If I give you more money, I'm going to make tons of money. They were really looking for a track record of you doing meaningful things. And the only meaningful things are product and technology, customers and revenue, and less about product. Once you've got a working product, nobody cares about your product. So what they really care about is you showing movement upwards in that business. Remember, you're not building tech, you're building a business that happens to be powered by tech. Now, let's say you've had this call, you've spoken to 60 or 70 VCs, which is the minimum I would suggest you speak to. If you can speak to more, because of that horrible Venn diagram of death. But now you've spoken to your 60 or 100 VCs, and one of them really likes you, and over 6 weeks you've got to the process where they've spoken to their investment committee, they're keen to invest, they'll give you something called a term sheet. Now, a term sheet is really just the agreement to invest. But there's a couple of things that happen before that. So let's talk about that first call with your VC, or the 70 VCs that you're going to talk to. The first thing you want to focus on is normally most VCs will want to introduce themselves first. So let them introduce them first. Don't be that guy going, "Daddy, Daddy, look at my toy, look at my toy." No, nobody wants that. So what you're going to ask them is, what themes do they focus on? What geographies do they focus on? Do they invest at your stage of business? What is the typical turnaround time from them having a conversation to them issuing a term sheet to them paying you the money? For good VCs, this is about 6 weeks. For other VCs, this can be anywhere up to 6 to 8 months. You might be out of business, long before you actually get the money, even if they're going to give you the money. You also want to find out how much banked capital do they have? Have they raised money? Do they have any money to actually give you, or have they spent it all? That's a very important thing. And then finally, what preferred geographies do they want your business to be in? And I can guarantee you the answer is never South Africa. Your job is to learn to accept no for an answer and to be graceful for that, because you are going to hear that infinitely more than you hear yes. When you get that feedback that is a no, be a grown-up, be a decent human being and say, "Thank you so much. I really appreciate you taking the time. Do you have any pointers, or could you explain to me where you feel we could have done better or what we need to improve on?" They will hopefully, if they're a good VC, give you those pointers. Your job at this point is not to try and re-win the argument. It is to take the feedback, spend 2 or 3 weeks crying in your bed, figuring it out, and hearing the things you don't want to hear, being a grown-up, and then implementing and taking that feedback or that advice like a mature human being. If you understand this, you will understand the difference between winning and learning. The old proverb is, if you win, great. If you lose, unlucky. But if you learn from that loss and it helps you get better to the next win, then there is no losing. It's winning and learning. If, however, you lose and you don't learn for it, well, then guess what? You lost, and it's entirely on you. And again, you're going to speak to 100 people the first time round to get 1 yes. Learn to be gracious. Learn to learn from your mistakes and learn to learn from those no's. Now, when you're raising this money again, and I said it earlier, you need to raise 24 months runway. Runway is how much money you will need to pay all your bills for 24 months before your business is bankrupt. And guess what? You just raised your $300,000. You've got 24 months runway. You should start raising again immediately after you finish raising, because it will take you anywhere from 3 months to a year to find someone to say yes, and another 6 weeks to 3 months for them to pay you the money. And you need that next round of money long before you run out of money. Because if you can raise while you've still got money in the bank, you can get a good deal. If you go to a VC and say, "I've got no money, we're going to go bankrupt," they're going to give you bad terms. You're negotiating against yourself. And finally, raising is exhausting. I've done it many, many times. My best advice is the same advice I'd give a kid at Christmas who asked me for a shiny new BMX. In the same way that they wanted a BMX and you wanted to run your startup, you wanted this bike, now ride it. So now you've had your call with your investor and they want to give you a term sheet. They've agreed to invest money. Now there's a couple of things you really need to know about a term sheet. Number one, even though it's a big fancy legal document which sets out the terms of investment, the conditions, the expectations of this investment for both parties, it is not a legally binding contract. And so what could happen is you sign the term sheet, you breathe that deep sigh of relief and dread that you can now pay your bills, and guess what? The money never comes. And this happens more often than you would think. These days, you've got a 50-50 chance. Now, like I said, unlike a contract, this is not legally binding. So don't expect that you're going to go sue people for the money. Chances are they didn't pay you because they don't have the money. So again, you're going to speak to 100 people, find 3 or 4 want to give you money. Probably one of them will pay you. Now, a term sheet has a ton of traps, which is a longer 6-hour lesson where you have to understand what those terms mean, which ones you want to agree to them, and which ones are absolutely predatory. Now, a couple of things. Normally, when you're selling equity for your business, this is they give you money, you give them a percentage shareholding in your business, and potentially a board seat. What it is not is a loan against your assets. It does not guarantee a return to that investor. So don't get caught up into something that's just a, mob-style loan shark versus a true equity deal. And now, as I mentioned, there are a lot of terms that are traps. There are things like participation or the dreaded liquidity preference. You need to know all of these terms just as well as your startup lawyer does this and your board, if not better. Now, you have to know all those terms and get a good startup lawyer with you to review those terms. But before you sign any term sheet, there is a book by Brad Felt called Venture Deals, Smarter Than Your Lawyer and Your Venture Capitalist. I've put a link in the presentation. Please, please, please do not sign a single term sheet until you have fully read that book. And I don't mean an audio book or an AI summary. You have to read the book in full to the letter. Once you've done that, sign your term sheet, and hopefully the money will arrive in your bank. Now, you've got the money arrived, yay! There's a bunch of things you shouldn't do. Number 1, do not increase your salary. You are not big time yet. You won't be getting big time salaries till 7, 8, 9, 10 years down the line. As an example, in many of my startups, many of the people who work for me earn far more than I do. Now, that seems weird because you're the big boss. Well, being a good leader and being a financially responsible leader doesn't mean you get the big bucks. You should not try to spend any of your money on anything you don't need except getting customers and revenue, because that's what will get you your next round of investment. And how well you spent the money from the previous round will determine whether a VC will or won't invest in you again. Please, 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 I beg you humbly, don't go buy fancy offices. There's a reason they're called garage startups. It's a waste of money. Don't spend your time going to startup events. They are a waste of time. You should be out there getting customers. Don't go speaking at events. It feels really good for the ego, but unless you're a venture capitalist or you've made so much money that it no longer matters, you shouldn't be the guy on stage. Obviously, if you're trying to get on a Forbes list, please also know that the Forbes 30 under 30, 40 under 40, any of those lists to venture capitalists usually is the biggest signal that you can't perform, you're ego-driven, probably unethical, and certainly not worth investing in. So please don't chase things that are good for the ego. Chase things that are good for business. You absolutely do not need a PA or a secretary. You definitely don't need a shiny new car. Your only job is to grow the business. If you took a bunch of money over here and you can't show how you 20x your number of customers, you will not get money over here. You will go bankrupt. It will suck. Founders get paid last. Things are going to get tight. You are typically the first one to go off salary. And you could go off salary for 3 months. You could go off salary for a year. Manage your lifestyle accordingly. Don't get fancy houses and fancy cars. Don't have debt. Own what you need. Work 100 plus hours a week for the next 10 years. It's going to be brutal. Your job as a founder, it's going to be brutal. Your job as a founder, everyone who talks to you is going to be either lying to you or giving you bad news. You're going to speak to a VC, oh, well done on your accomplishments thus far. That is a pattern thing they say to every single person. They haven't looked at your accomplishments, they don't care. Your mom's going to be proud of you. Your friends are going to be proud of you. But your staff and your customers, the only thing they're going to call you into is problems when things are going wrong. So toughen up, Buttercup. It's going to get fun. Now, If that didn't scare you, I have done a terrible job, but I'll say it again. Building a startup is the hardest thing you will ever do. There is nothing that will bring you more continuous trauma for 10 years other than maybe being in a concentration camp. It will be 10 years of hard doing impossible things because you've been asked to do an impossible task. Here, with very little or no money, please build $1 billion business in 10 years. That's insane. It's like, here's a paperclip, build a rocket to take us to the moon. But that's the job you signed up for. Once you accept that, it'll get a little easier to deal with. Then be kind to yourself, because you're going to need to survive this. Be kind to your team. You won't do anything without them. And remember, be kind to your investors. You have taken their money. They have believed in you. They might not give you more money. It's very seldom that an investor will give you money a second, third, or fourth time around. But at some point, they gave you money. They will give you a hard time to know how you're spending their money. They will give you a hard time on performance. Remember, it's their money. You took it. Be kind to them as well. And most of all, good luck. This stuff is hard, but hey, I'm hoping you're the one who can do it. Thank you so much.
All right, awesome. Thank you so much, Craig McLeod, for that beautiful lesson. All right, so join us next time where we'll be talking about marketing your app business. Please don't forget to hashtag FNB App Academy. Please do keep social media buzzing. It's really important for us to get those videos uploaded on your social spaces. See you guys next time. I'm your host. My name is Karabo Mohole. Peace.